Welcome, everybody. Good to see the members of the audience. We've got quite a few out here this morning. First off, I'm going to start out with, is there any introduction of bills? Anyone? I do not see anyone. Okay. With that, if I could get Nick to talk about the bill introductions here, because we're running out of time.
So committee members, bill introduction deadlines are coming up. They're provided for in the joint rules. Now I know it looks like those joint rules are sitting on the Senate floor and they still need to take action on them, but there have been no changes made by the House, and I assume there's not going to be any changes made by the Senate to these deadlines. But on Monday the 30th, so just yesterday, seems like so long ago, it was the last day for individual members to request drafts out of the revisor's office. So if you're going to be introducing it with your name or any co-sponsor's name on the bill, yesterday was the last day that you could request that legislation from us. February 6th, Monday, February 6th is the last day that committees, non-exempt committees, can have bill requests made in the committee. So that means for our committee, we only meet today and then Thursday. So Thursday for our committee is the last day that bill requests can be made in this committee. Then there's a couple other deadlines for the revisor's office that we have to abide by to get those bills turned in. So if a request is made in committee on Thursday, we, the revisors, have an obligation to get that bill processed and turned in and delivered to the chairperson for introduction and to receive an official bill number by Friday the 10th. So get your bill introductions, your requests in this committee by Thursday.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions to the revisors? Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Myers, when you say by Thursday, are you talking about 2 days from now or Thursday of next week? And can you differentiate for me the difference between when I have to go to the reviser and say, I need a committee bill versus when I have to sit here and say, I'd like to introduce RS 4387?
Yes, so that request in committee has to be made on or before Monday, February 6th. So when you're requesting a bill in committee, that request has to be made on or before Monday, February 6th. And again, since this committee does not meet on that Monday, unless the chair were to allow some special meeting for a bill introduction purpose, our last day for requesting bills is going to be this Thursday.
So in order to have a bill drafted, do I have to make the request in the committee? I thought I could call you up and say, I need a committee bill drafted. And I could do that today, tomorrow, anytime that I can find you.
I see what you're saying. Yes, that is correct. So any of those committee bills, get with your revisor, talk to a revisor, and we'll start drafting it. But the deadline to make that request in a committee with that RS number, we will get you that RS number to make that request in committee. But the deadline for that request to be made in the committee is February the 6th.
A week from this coming Thursday.
That would be Monday.
Oh, the 6th.
So Thursday the 2nd is our last official meeting day before the bill request in committee deadline.
So what I called you about, for example, yesterday, I have to introduce an RS number on Thursday.
Yes, sir.
That means I have to come to committee on Thursday, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I am so sorry, Mr. Carmichael. Representative Proctor.
I want to make sure I understand what you said, because on my calendar, there's another date, February 8th, which is the last day for individuals to introduce bills. I thought that the deadline on the 6th was to ask the revisor, for the committee to ask the revisor to write the bill.
That is technically correct. The request can be made in a committee. The hurdle there is when a request is made in committee. Typically, chairpersons require you to already have an RS number with the revisor's office. So we've already been working on it. We've got you an RS number to make that request to the committee. That February 8th deadline, yesterday was the last day that an individual, you, Representative Proctor, could come and say, I want a bill, and it's going to just be sponsored by me. That was the last day you could talk to the revisor about getting that bill draft in. And then that February 8th deadline is for us, the revisor, that we need to get it to you on the floor for official bill introduction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? All right, not seeing any. You guys should have received a copy of the minutes from last time. And do I hear a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we adopt the minutes from last meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
And who are you? I want
Representative Turner seconds.
Yeah, you got that, Mindy? Okay, thank you. Okay, Body. All in favor? Any opposed? Not hearing none. Minutes are passed. With that, we've got a presentation on rural telecommunications. Pioneer Communications is here. Catherine Moyer, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to the committee. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right. I appreciate the invitation to appear. I'm going to do a quick overview. I gave you about 4 pages of written testimony. I'm not going to read that. I'm going to do some talking points and highlight a few things that are in that. I view that more as reference material. If you have questions about what's in it and I don't happen to cover it in my talking points, just ask me the questions and I'm happy to have a conversation. I'll defer to the chairman, but I'm happy to take questions as I present if anyone has them, or I can wait till the end, whatever the preference of the committee is. I'm here on behalf of the Communications Coalition of Kansas today. CCK represents the rural independent ILECs. We also call ourselves RLECs, Rural Local Exchange Carriers. Basically, we're the internet and phone companies that serve the really rural parts of Kansas.
I could stop you just for a moment there.
Sure.
I'm going to say about half of the team here are fairly new to the committee or the industry. What's an ILEC?
So it basically is the phone provider of last resort. I'm going to go into a few of the things about like a carrier of last resort and things of that nature, but it's basically the infrastructure provider in a certificated part of Kansas. And I'll talk a little bit about Pioneer specific area, but there are several other ILECs, RLECs in the room today. You've got Jeff Wick with Wamego WTC. You've got Bo Riebel and Kyle Barr with Golden Belt, and Casey Kruger also with Pioneer, and Jimmy Todd in the back with Next Tech. So they're also available for questions if anybody wants to ask them questions, but they might serve territories that are closer to you all's your districts. But there's 34 RLECs in Kansas. We serve 104 of the 105 counties in Kansas. We serve about 50% of the landmass of Kansas, but only 15% of the households of the premises. So we serve the really rural parts of Kansas. To illustrate the sparseness, I'm going to give you a few facts about Pioneer Service Territory, but what I'll tell you is that Pioneer Service Territory looks much like the other providers in this room. I'm going to talk specifically first about our certificated area, which is where we are eligible to receive universal service subsidies to help make service affordable to our customers. But we also have service territory outside of that. But I'm going to talk first about our certificated area. And we have 5,000 square miles out in Southwest Kansas. We have about 2 customers per square mile. But once you take into account the population distribution, it really drops much further below that, because we have 81% of our subscribers live in what I will call the towns. So 15 square miles out of those 5,000 square miles is what I would call a town. 81% of our population lives there. So 19% of the population lives in the other, 4,985 square miles, meaning that you get to like less than half a person, half a subscriber per square mile when you get to that point. It's very, very sparsely populated. And when it comes to actually network, obviously there's a huge number of route miles out in the sparsely populated territory where very few customers live. And really why I tell you that is because the more customers you have, the more density you have of customers, the easier it is to spread costs to those customers. When you have very few customers and a lot of network, it obviously makes it very expensive to serve. So that's a little bit about our territory. Like I said, all of the other territories of providers like Pioneer look very similar to that. We're also carrier of last resort. And that goes a little bit to the chairman's question about what does it mean to be an RLEC or an ILEC. And carriers of last resort really means that we have to serve someone, in this case with voice service. We have to serve someone with voice service in that territory if they request it. We don't have the ability to say no. We have to serve them, regardless of the economics of it, whether it's viable to do it or not. We have to serve them. They were basically, those COLR, carrier of last resort obligations, were established to make sure that voice service would be in the rural parts of not just Kansas, but obviously the US. It basically ensures that there is voice service for those people that reside in places where competition isn't going to take care of providing service. And I think there's a misconception that voice lines have dropped off and we don't provide voice anymore. We actually do provide voice. It's pretty level for most of our service territory. I'll tell you, there's parts of Kansas still where cell phones really aren't great. Cell signal either is non-existent or is very faint. So there are still quite a few people in our service territory, as well as others, that still have their voice landline. But I will also tell you that those voice networks provide broadband too, which I think is more of the hot topic of the day, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. But in exchange for those carrier of last resort obligations, we have access to universal service in the Kansas Universal Service Fund as well. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But what I really want to spend time about is talking more about what the future part of provision of service looks like. What I will say is that I feel that this is a success story, that we have done a very good job of deploying services and networks in the sparsely populated parts of Kansas. And I think that's a success story, not only for the customers, but for the people that want to reach those customers. As you all are well aware, a lot of commerce is done over the network. So if people have that connection, other folks can obviously have access to those people. In addition, we provide a lot of the backhaul for wireless carriers. So if you think about when you place a cell phone call and it goes to a tower, it immediately hits a fiber network and gets backhauled elsewhere. And so a lot of that network is the network that we provide as well. So what I mentioned obviously was we had this area of the certificated pieces where we have to provide service, but there's also pieces outside of our territory outside of that where we provide service. And I think those are the places where we, as well as other companies, have said, okay, look, there is a business model. We can go serve these areas. And we go out and do that. There are normally, the small towns, sort of the population pieces throughout rural America, rural Kansas. Again, best case is that there is a business plan to do it. Pioneer itself is organized as a cooperative, so we have a little bit of a different model when it comes to how much money needs to be made in those business cases. So I will tell you that we often operate on very, very thin margin in that case, because we have more of an eye to let's provide service and make sure that we can get folks connected. This is where I think it becomes very important, because there are still, where there is not the business case, there are still some wide swaths of places that don't have great service. Those are the unserved and underserved parts of Kansas. And those are the places where all of the grant programs are really going to be important. And I know that you've already had quite a few folks testify in front of the committee about, specifically like the Kansas Office of Broadband Deployment, talking about what those grant programs are and what is upcoming, as well as what's already been done in the recent past. I will tell you that our industry has worked very close, not only with the federal government, but also with the Kansas Office of Broadband Development through Commerce, to make sure that those grants will best serve the rural parts of Kansas. We've participated as companies. We've participated in the Spark SERG money, the first 2 rounds of the BAG program. I shouldn't say we all, most of us participated or made applications through the Capital Projects Fund here recently that were just awarded in the 3 phases towards the end of last year. And then we all plan to participate in the upcoming BEAD program, which I think, again, I believe Jay talked about quite a bit, either earlier this week or the end of last week. But those programs we have the opportunity to infuse millions of dollars within the rural parts of Kansas to provide service. and to encourage adoption, because those are two things that are linked. I will tell you too that Pioneer, we specifically did participate in the middle mile discussions with KOBD and KDOT, but we unfortunately weren't able to participate, though I know that the state of Kansas did actually make an application and has it pending in front of NTIA, with hope that some of those middle mile dollars will come to the state of Kansas. I'm going to take a few minutes here just to talk about some of the considerations as we look at those grant programs, and what's important to us as we have those conversations internally at our companies. Because there's not a business plan, we have to talk about what the infusion of dollars look like. So when we're talking about building those networks, we're talking about keeping the cost to the customer affordable. Obviously, we know what it's going to cost to build it, but what ultimately then do you have to turn around and charge the customer to utilize the network? So that's a really important part of the formula. Right? Somebody really wants in. But when we talk about those grants, we need to make sure that the one-time grant is sufficient, because if we don't look at what the sufficiency is and what those grant dollars will do, there is a possibility that if you get to a point where the revenues from the customers don't actually cover the ongoing operating expenses of networks, then you're stranding those initial grant dollars. So there's a lot that goes into. It's not simply just, oh, hey, there's millions of dollars available, we're just going to go out and apply and cross our fingers and hope that it does well. There's actually a lot that we do internally to make sure that those grant dollars will do what we need them to do. I will say this, KOBD recently for CPF put in a sliding scale, and I don't know that Jay talked about that, but basically, if the more rural you were, the bigger match you could receive. And that's really that's why, right? It's because if you have a bigger match, then the sustainability of that network going forward makes a lot more sense. But I will also tell you that the Kansas companies need to be in it for the long term. I'm going to I guess highlight something that Pioneer did here recently, is that we built 32 locations for $750,000. So that equates to $23,500 per location. If you think about that on a per location basis, if they're getting $100 worth of internet service, it's going to take us more than 20 years to recover that initial investment. And that's just the initial investment. That's not the ongoing operating costs or anything else that happen as you provide service to the customer. So you've got to be in it for the long haul. This isn't for, a fly by night. This is for the Kansas companies that have been invested in our communities for a very long time. The other piece I think that is important is that networks need to be scalable. And we've seen a tremendous amount of data growth, especially in light of COVID, where everybody went to work from home and school from home, et cetera. But a lot of those things didn't revert back after COVID, if we're technically after COVID. A lot of those things people are still doing at home. And it's not just the entertainment piece, it's doctor's visits, it's education, and it's two-way communications. So as you see that data increase, you need to make sure that that network is scalable. Because if you get to a point where you can't accommodate the data, then that becomes obviously a real problem. So basically, the three things I just talked about was higher speed subscriptions, a large growth in data, both download and upload, illustrate really why those networks need to be scalable. If they're not scalable, they can become pretty antiquated pretty quickly, because we've seen this growth happen so quickly with data. And to this end, I will note that in the aggregate, the companies that are represented by CCK in 2023 alone are going to spend more than $215 million building these networks. That's irrespective of grants. So any grant dollars are going to be an additional infusion into those dollars. So point is, we're making very big investments in the state of Kansas, and have in the past, but also as we go into the future. And I wanted to highlight that for you. I want to talk a little bit too about middle mile transport, because I know that you had a little bit of a conversation about that in committee. I will say that over the past 10 years, Pioneer's middle mile costs have decreased dramatically to the tune of about 80%. Today, to our customers, it's less than $3.50 per subscriber per month for middle mile costs. So, I think that providers continue to build network in the state of Kansas and compete for the business of Pioneer and others that need that backhaul to different places. So with that, I'm going to stop and entertain questions, because I think the question and answer piece is probably more important.
All right, thank you. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Chairman. This isn't really a question, but I've been on this committee for a long time. But we have several people here, and when you're using acronyms for the first time, and you said you weren't going to follow this, can you explain what that acronym is the first time, so that everybody will understand? Because it can be every business has acronyms, but for the first time, some of us might be looking at the deer in the headlights and going, "Oh, another group. Can you tell me what that one is?"
Okay.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else? Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Moyer. As I drop all the paper, my question is related on the build out, and I know you could speak to specifically for Pioneer, but as far as supply chain issues or employment for the people that install the service, are you running into problems there?
We do. We have quite a bit of a supply chain issue, and mostly I'll say with the hardware. Specifically, I'll note we're building a fiber project right now in one of our small towns in Southwest Kansas. We will have all of the connectivity built probably by the end of February, but I won't be able to cut those customers over to fiber until probably the June timeframe, because there is one particular piece of equipment that is out until June. So we're running into things like that. You're also running into I don't know, maybe not dramatic, but decent increases in price for things where we were paying, $100 for something in the past, and now it's $250. So you are seeing sort of the cost go up, and you are seeing the lead time go out. I will say that as more grant dollars flood the market, I expect those things to continue. I always thought we were going to catch up at some point, and we haven't caught up. And now, again, more dollars are coming out. When it comes to labor, we haven't necessarily found a labor issue for employees that we hire, but we have a contractor issue, because most of us don't have, the crews that are going to actually do the construction piece of it. So we go out and get contractors. Well, again, with that influx of dollars throughout not just Kansas, but the entire US, those contractors are very busy, and then it becomes make sure we find the good contractors versus some that are just the startups. I think somebody last night referred to them as the roofers that show up when the hailstorm comes through town, and making sure that we're using quality people. And so that becomes an issue as well.
Anyone else? Okay. I've got a couple if I could. Obviously you're rolling out a lot of fiber out in your area. Are you using any fixed wireless?
We do not have any fixed wireless in our network right now. We do have some licensed spectrum that we do plan to use later this year to do fixed wireless. And the way that we view it as Pioneer, the way we view it is it's not a permanent solution; it's a temporary solution until we get fiber there. It's an aggregate to places where there is still some copper network where this would be additional speed. That is not always the case with other RLECs, the other companies that look like Pioneer. There are folks that have fixed wireless in their networks, and it's a little bit more of a permanent solution. But basically, the way I think that most of us look at it is we're going to do anything we can do to get the speed necessary to the customers.
Okay. Then could I get you to deviate just a little bit? I know you're Pioneer, but how do you get connectivity, say, to Wichita or Kansas City? And, could you speak a little bit about the coalition of the various rurals out
Right.
there? And
Maybe 10, 12 years ago, we created it, maybe actually slightly longer ago than that. We created the Kansas Fiber Network. And really what it did is we had multiple providers around the state. And so what we did was leverage the networks that we had around the state to make one larger fiber ring, as well as then build some additional fiber and whatnot to do that connectivity. We utilize KFN, the Kansas Fiber Network, to get to a couple of different locations for us to Kansas City. We also go to Wichita, and that connection eventually goes south to Tulsa, Oklahoma City. We utilize other carriers as well. We don't just utilize KFN. We utilize a couple of other fiber carriers to go to Denver and a couple of other places, basically looking at it from a geographic diversity piece as well as a diversity of carriers, so that if someone goes down, you have plenty of redundancy in other carriers. But the Kansas Fiber Network did put together not all of the independents, but the majority of the independents together into a fiber ring, making it, frankly, more affordable. It created another competitor in the market for middle mile and making it more affordable to get to some of those places. So, we've got fiber throughout Southwest Kansas, but we eventually interconnect with other carriers to go, for example, to Kansas
What kind of
City.
speed you're running on the backbones there?
Yeah, all of those links that I talked about are 10 gig links, and we have 5 of them, and other companies have more or less depending on what their aggregate traffic is.
So in reality, there is a fair amount of fiber out there. It's just a question of getting the other
Quite a bit.
communities to connect in.
And we actually just looked at upgrading one of those 10 gig links to a 100 gig link, and got some good pricing.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Any other questions, committee? Go ahead.
Am I called on? All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Say, I was just curious. How do you set your rates? Are you regulated by the KCC, or is there another answer to that question? Thanks.
It depends. On voice, we are regulated by the KCC. Every 2 years, the Kansas Corporation Commission does a statewide average local rate and rate rebalances every 2 years and tells you this is what you need to charge for voice. On the broadband side of things, no, we are not regulated. That's where you start to get into jurisdictional matters and who has oversight and whatnot. But the Kansas Corporation Commission does not have oversight of the internet side of things, and so that's where you start to look at more of the federal piece. But they don't set rates, but they do have they have a national affordable rate that they reset as well, so that you have something to benchmark to. But in general, it's a little bit more free market, and you're trying to make it affordable for the customer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on the heels of both of those questions, and you may have already answered it, but just for my take on it, with free market happening right now with the network and the backbone and the consortium that you have, what is the biggest inhibitor, if you could say, for us getting good rates and you all getting all of those services expanded out to those rural areas at decent rates? Because I know that you're in business and not a charity, but I'd just like to understand what that landscape looks like. What's the fight?
Honestly, it is the capital expenditure at the start of the project. It's actually putting fiber in the ground and connecting customers. That's the most capital intensive part of the business. A lot of the other things on the backside of it are becoming, again, more affordable, et cetera. But it's that capital investment that's really the biggest piece of it. And it kind of goes back to the start of my testimony when I talked about the sparseness. If we had a whole bunch of customers to spread that cost over, it'd be a lot easier to make it more affordable or cheaper, whatever word you'd like to use.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We know that there's juice in their squeeze, so I was always curious about that. Thank you.
There you go. If there's no other questions, Catherine, I appreciate you making the trip in. It's 5 hours coming in this way, so
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Before we move on to the next one, I'm going to back up just a little bit. Is there any introduction of bills? Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Myers' admonitions this morning because I thought I had until next week, and then I found that he has, in fact, been hard at work and has emailed me a couple of RS numbers. So I have 2 bills that I would like to introduce this morning with the committee's permission. The first is 2023 RS 0820, increasing the number of appointed commissioners on the Kansas Corporation Commission and disqualifying certain individuals from appointment to the Kansas Corporation Commission. The second proposed committee bill is 23, I guess it would be, RS 0821, reducing the fees imposed on telecommunications services under the 911 Act.
All right. Committee, any questions? Representative, your bills have been accepted. Or your RSs, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your courtesy in reopening this portion of our agenda.
Absolutely. So with that, we will move on to physical and cybersecurity in the utility industry with Evergy. Mr. Gary Johnson, welcome to the committee, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and the other members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to present Evergy's position on cyber and physical security. So I'm the senior director of IT infrastructure and security, and that's both cyber and physical, and that's for all of Evergy, with one exception that Bear's talking about, and that's our nuclear power plant, and that's managed at a local level, primarily due to NRC requirements. But I can address questions about the power plant, but may not have all the answers. So what I wanted to talk about is the geopolitical situation and what that's caused Evergy to do from a reaction perspective. I could talk a little bit about the electric utility industry's reaction to that situation, talk about the recent substation attacks, and I'm sure there's some curiosity there. Certainly want to address that, and then talk a little bit about 2022 from a cyber perspective and what we saw and what we have done to address cyber and physical security, and then plans for 2023, and hopefully make this interesting and as quick as it needs to be so you can ask questions. So digging right in, about a week before Russia invaded the Ukraine, we got notifications from DOE and other agencies that that the invasion was imminent. Evergy enacted its crisis management plan, so to begin managing the business under whatever that meant, right? Whatever that invasion was going to mean from a security perspective. So we kicked that into gear a week before the invasion occurred. We started meeting on a daily basis and talking about different things that could happen. And we put together alert levels 1 through 5, 1 being where we are now and have been ever since day one, is just continuous monitoring and enhanced monitoring of the different indicators of compromise that were showing up from our different threat intelligence feeds: Kansas Fusion Center, Homeland Security, FBI, several private streams that we subscribe to. So that was the first reaction. Then we began meeting with all the different business units at Evergy and talking about, okay, if different scenarios were to occur, how do we continue to deliver service? So what we realized really quickly is that our cybersecurity incident response plans were not thorough enough. They didn't cover all the different scenarios. So we rewrote every plan for every business unit and began testing those plans. And things that we tested against were, hey, what if we had to disconnect from the internet? What impact does that have to the business? Can we still deliver power? Can we still serve our customers? So we began working through those scenarios from level 1 through 5, right? Level 1, enhanced monitoring. What does that mean to, well, it doesn't really mean a lot to anybody but the cybersecurity folks. We're doing all the monitoring. But as things progress, right, if we had to shut down supply chain connectivity, well, what impact does that have? So we built those plans. We created 34 new plans, across the business. So it was a really positive outcome from a really bad situation. Now, from a cyber perspective, what we started to see almost immediately, an 800% increase in scanning. So bad guys scan every public IP address in the world all the time. That traffic went up 8-fold immediately. And that isn't, what does that mean, right? That's millions of scans a day that we're blocking with our internet firewalls, and everyone else is too. And they scan looking for vulnerabilities, ways to get into the network and either steal something or, in this case, do damage to our ability to deliver power. So we saw that traffic go up 8-fold. It really only lasted for a few days, and then it dropped back to twice what the previous normal was, and we've been there ever since. So see increased scanning attempts, phishing went up significantly. Everybody understands what phishing is at this point, I'm assuming. We had one incident where a user clicked on a link in a phishing email, and it was our tools that sit on each endpoint device, each PC, blocked that malware from executing. So, we have layers of tools and defense mechanisms in the environment that help protect against attacks. So that was an example of one layer, the human failing, but the technology that we have deployed to catch things like that worked. So that was a good outcome. I think in the slides you got Shields up there. That's been a very useful tool for us. Initially there were daily updates on indicators of a compromise and things to look for in the network. Now not so much, but they're updated when they change, so it's useful. Honestly, it's useful as an individual too. If you went out to that website, there's a page of recommendations for individuals from a cybersecurity perspective. So, I recommend everyone look at that and take advantage. It's really just common sense stuff, right? Don't use the same password on every site. Don't use the same user IDs. Use a password vault if you can. I know some folks that I've talked to before in here actually took my recommendation on that, so that's a good thing. And take the updates on your phones and operating systems. So there's some good information out there on that. One other thing that I wanted to bring up on the geopolitical front is back in, I think it was in April timeframe of last year, there was some operations technology malware discovered that impacted Schneider and Omron technology that sits in operations networks. So, we have two networks essentially, right? We have IT, which is the corporate network where all PeopleSoft and tools that we use just to operate the business sit. And then, the tools that we use, the networks that we use to deliver power, that's operations technology. Those networks are segmented. They're not, it's really difficult to get from one to the other. So Russians built malware, very modular malware that operates in that OT network. And if we think back in history, December of 2015, the Russians attacked the Ukraine power structure and took power down to 250,000 people for several hours, forced them to go out in trucks and operate manually. But that was a coordinated attack that took many people to actually do. The next year, 1 year later, they did a similar attack in the Ukraine again, and it was automated. So it was a modular automated attack. It's really scary to me. Now they're just building software that they can use to attack, critical infrastructure, technology, safety systems, generation systems. So it's pretty critical that IT and OT networks stay segmented and you have the right visibility and protections in place. So moving on, substation attacks, right? There have been several of those recently. Moore County, North Carolina, 2 substations were attacked, 45,000 people without power for a few days. They actually restored that pretty quickly. I think initial estimates were a couple of weeks. It was actually 3 or 4 days. So they did a great job restoring power. But there was a supply chain challenge there, right? That it's pretty obvious now, right? Those transformers and parts like that are really expensive. Takes a really long lead time to produce them. 18 to 24 months. If you order one now, they were able to restore power by stealing spares from other substations and moving parts around. So that model doesn't last, right? If you have multiple attacks. Pierce County, Washington, 14,000 customers taken out of power. I don't know if everybody knows the specifics there, but a couple of folks were arrested. And apparently their motive was not terrorism. It was trying to shut down power to a specific business so they could rob it. But it still had a serious impact, multi-millions of dollars worth of damage. And then the Las Vegas solar array that was attacked with a gentleman that was upset with fossil fuels and wanted to make a statement and blew up his car and caused millions of dollars worth of damage to the solar array. That array was really providing power for MGM resorts. So the impact is to their business and not so much to individual customers, but still, a significant event. So since these attacks have occurred, we've started looking at all of our substations, doing threat assessments, reprioritizing substations based on subscribers and the NERC SIP guidelines that came out a few years ago, putting together a budget and recommendations about should we modify our physical security around substations, et cetera. And then also looking at supply chain. I mentioned that before, making sure that we have critical parts available, in either on hand or quickly available if we need them. So moving on to 2022, just a little bit about what we saw. Talked a little bit about phishing already. That remains the preferred method of infiltrating somebody's network. Ransomware continues to be the most prevalent attack. It's really bothersome to me because it's malware that can be prevented. It's not that difficult to protect your network against that. We continue to mature our program. We spend a lot of focus, obviously, on the geopolitical things that were happening, but also on just improving our visibility into the critical infrastructure, so into the OT security networks. And then we had multiple third-party assessments, right? We couldn't really do our job without outside help. So we had government agencies come in and help us look at the environment from a security perspective that are focused on critical infrastructure. We had, paid third parties come in and help us, look at cloud technology as an example, and how do we monitor that, and how do we make sure that we're not putting data at risk. So a lot of help from the outside. We conduct an incident response tabletop every year, and this year we tested our incident response plan and all of our backup and recovery plans, and then some of the things that we looked at, and we put this together before the substation attacks for sure. But we had simulated drone attacks that we looked at. There were a lot of drone surveillance that was happening throughout the year at substations and plants. So we did some simulated attacks there, denial of service attacks against our website, and then of course we simulated a ransomware attack in our energy management system, which is if something like that happened there, our ability to manage our power system would be greatly inhibited. The KCC has participated actively with us the last 2 or 3 years in that specific tabletop. So that's been good. One of the third-party assessments I wanted to talk about, we had the FERC Office of Energy Infrastructure Security, OEIS. That's the acronym for that one. They came out in early last year, before the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and did a deep assessment of our security environment. And they looked at everything. They looked at social media. They looked at marketing. they did some scanning of all of our web presence. And then we did like 3 days of briefings with them to talk about, what they found. And, we have a really good program, but they brought me a 2-inch binder of things that they found. And 90% of that had really nothing to do with cybersecurity tools or phishing or anything. It was, things that from a marketing perspective, there were a lot of marketing things that we were doing that had, pictures of stuff. Right. So, it was a really good experience. KCC worked with us on that too. So that was a good third party assessment. A couple of things that we did that came out of the different third party assessments. The most significant one was updating our password policy and increasing that to 14 digits. So it's a nuisance for individuals, right, to remember a 14-digit password, but it takes about 30 years to crack one of those, with a Cray machine. So I feel better about that, but we're actually looking at ways to eliminate the password, biometrics and other opportunities to take more of the human, interface out of the security challenge. So that's one thing we're looking at for 2023. A couple other things. We talked a little bit about substation security. The assessments that we're doing today. Plan to begin implementing any changes later this year. Continued automation on the cyber side. That's the only way to really, improve performance is to be faster than humans, right? And automation is the key to that. Working on some more cloud monitoring, supply chain monitoring and assessment. So we're actually bringing in a tool that will allow us to see all of our critical suppliers and their security posture and ongoing assessment of that. And then I mentioned the biometrics piece already. And that was it on what I was going to ramble on about. Certainly ready to entertain questions.
Very interesting subject. I appreciate your talk on it. We have some questions. Representative Slane-Sheepin.
We've been hearing a lot about hydrogen hubs. Is Evergy already kind of thinking ahead to what the transport of hydrogen is going to entail in terms of security array that you've been addressing?
I don't have an answer for you for hydrogen. We're not we're not talking. At least I'm sure there are conversations going on, but I'm not involved in those.
Representative Penn.
It was a no-look pass, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. It's like looking that way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate that. All of your words, as you went on, you hit a lot of all the questions I was going to ask you. So great job. I wanted to ask you one in particular, though, dealing with the internal capabilities that you have for cybersecurity and vulnerabilities, threat assessments, and things of that. Do you all have like if you're allowed to say, I don't know, like an internal white hat cell that can exercise your network as well versus waiting for those annual? I think you said that the incident response tabletop is an annual piece that you do.
Yeah, so we do purple team events, right? So we have a red team. So red team is the bad guy. Think of it as the bad guys, right? The blue team are the good guys, and we play the different roles on the team and try to attack ourselves, right? So today, in fact, there's an OT assessment going on right now. So we're doing a tabletop trying to find holes in our OT security. So that's happening right now. We do probably a dozen different kind of security operations center driven, tabletops a year.
Sure. And Mr. Chairman, I won't take up the majority of the committee's time, but if I could ask two more, please. Thank you. Also dealing with, I like what you said about the biometric side of trying to make sure that you have a good network security in that regard. A lot of it comes down to what you know and what you have, right? Have you thought about having certificates, CAC cards, things of that nature, as well as certificates and placed on that on people's physical persons besides biometrics?
Yeah, I mean, visibility is key to everything, right? And security, cyber, physical, et cetera. Um, I think I mentioned working on OT, security, visibility. So from a cyber perspective, we've been deploying, um, you know, intrusion detection solutions in the OT space for about 5 years now, which is ahead of some of our peers and behind maybe a couple. So if you can't see it, you can't protect it. So that's an example of what we're pushing in the OT space. Physical security is the same way, right? We need more cameras, more more intrusion detection technology out at the substation level. We're looking at radar, right? You can build a radar perimeter around a plant, around a substation, and set it to look for anything bigger than a dog, right, crossing the perimeter, and you can whitelist your people and your vehicles and things like that, so you don't have any false alarms or less false alarms. So we're looking at things like that. Any way to improve visibility, and try to keep the human interaction, limited to when it really needs to be there.
And Mr. Chairman, final piece right here, and I really appreciate that. I think blockchain technology is a good piece to secure your network from tip to tail as well. When we're talking about the human interaction piece, did you find anything in there with vulnerabilities dealing with cross-domain violations, unauthorized disclosures of information, like you were talking about the phishing side of the house? And I'm sorry, when you answer this one right here, because I have to stop. When you find those types of things in the gigs and the issues that you have, what is your rate and timeline on fixing those and resolving them?
Yeah. So when we find vulnerabilities through an assessment or our own scanning, our own desire is to resolve those within 30 days from a patching perspective. 30 days of a patch actually being available. There are always situations that may hinder that effort. So we have to find other ways to protect those vulnerable assets, and that may be just different firewall rules and limiting access to that environment, or other technologies that we put in place to monitor the network more closely. Look for anomalous behavior. We're doing that. From an insider threat perspective, as well as outsider. So looking for, and when I say insider threat, a lot of people say or think, is that bad people, bad employees? Maybe. Most of the time, it's unwitting employees that have been compromised without knowing it, right? So just half a dozen times a year that we'll see somebody with compromised credentials. They clicked on something they shouldn't, and our tools catch that. And like I said, we have layers, right? It may be caught on the device when it happens, and maybe caught later in the network. It may be caught trying to leave the network. So, but it's very rare that it's caught by somebody else telling me.
Representative Schreiber, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Gary. Can you talk a little bit about the Fusion Center and its impact? I know some that have been on the committee before have heard about it, but for some of the new folks that
Sure.
want to understand what it is. Thank you.
Yeah, Kansas Fusion Center. It's probably, I don't know, the panacea of cyber fusion centers, right? There's several businesses as well as 8 government agencies that come together in one place, one physical location, folks that have top secret clearances and share information, right? We'll take our logs. We have one analyst that is assigned to the Fusion Center. He'll spend 1 or 2 days a week there. And that may not sound like a lot, but that's That's 40% of a very expensive resource that has a top secret security clearance. So they share information, come out with maybe actions to take back and implement in the network, work with law enforcement if we're seeing issues that they should be involved with. There's a lot of interaction there. Though actually we get notices from the Fusion Center pretty frequently with different indicators of compromise to look for. So it's, like I said, I think it may be the best, certainly the best that I'm involved with, but it may be one of the best in the country. I know that a lot of other state fusion centers have come and toured the Kansas Fusion Center. So that's hats off to the folks that put that into place and had the foresight to build it into what it is now.
Absolutely. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of areas of inquiry. Mr. Johnson, as I'm sure you know, in April of last year, the Justice Department indicted several Russian nationals in connection with a cyber attack on the Wolf Creek Nuclear Generating Station at Burlington. The attack appears to have been confined to the business side of a separate network as opposed to operations. And it looks like that plot may have been ongoing for perhaps 5 years, involved attempts to penetrate other nuclear generating stations. To the extent you can, tell us, were they successful at Wolf Creek, but apparently not successful at other stations? What was wrong at Wolf Creek that allowed this to happen, whereas apparently security at other facilities prevented those intrusions, and probably most importantly, what has been done to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I would argue that Wolf Creek wasn't the only victim there, right? There was Nuclear 17 is what.
And I might indicate too, you obviously have a lot more information about this than I have, and that's as it should be. So if I was incorrect in that regard, I apologize.
I just want to be clear, right? There were a lot of businesses and entities impacted by Nuclear 17. One of the biggest was an excavation company with less than 10 employees. So supply chain impact, right? They were impacted, and Russians were able to infiltrate other networks through their network. But what happened in Wolf Creek? So there were two engineers that were part of an external engineering association, and the Russians are sophisticated, right? They probe Facebook and LinkedIn and other social media out there and look for people that may have the credentials that they want, and then they target them. And that's what happened here, right? They sent those two individuals and many others that were part of that association, but those two individuals, got phishing emails that looked like they were from the association. I mean, they look very legitimate. They clicked on links and it asked for credentials. They were using their business user ID and password for that association. And that's how they were compromised. I mean, and that was before the Westar KCP&L merger. So Wolf Creek was operating as an independent entity. The follow up to that, right? So we found out about it when Homeland Security and the FBI notified us. Hey, you've got two machines in your network trying to talk to these known bad IP addresses. So once that happened, right, we had visitors from Homeland Security, FBI, et cetera, DOE, come in and do a detailed, multi-week assessment of the security environment at Wolf Creek, with a primary goal of making sure that it was just those two machines, just those two people that were compromised, and nothing, occurred in the operations network. Now at Wolf Creek, the IT network and the operations network are physically separated. So it's an extra step, that is required by the NRC, that those two networks. So you can't get from the internet, which is where all the bad stuff happens, to the operations network physically can't get there. So that's a protection. That's why the OT network was never, in question there. After the assessment was done and we had about 300 action items from Homeland Security and the FBI to go address. And we ticked those off. More importantly, the merger occurred just after that, and we implemented our security practices, at Wolf Creek. It took about a year to get all those in place, but today that, with a pretty good degree of confidence, that wouldn't happen today, even if they clicked, because even if they entered their credentials, as soon as that, the machine would try to beacon, we would see that with our intrusion detection network tools, or the whitelisting software that runs on every device would have blocked it from executing to begin with. So they didn't have that level of controls in place at the time. That's the reason that they didn't see it.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, by the way, Evergy owned 90%, or Evergy and KPL owned 90% of Wolf Creek Nuclear Operating Corporation at the time of the intrusion. And I might also observe, I'm a lot more concerned about intrusions at nuclear plants than I am at an excavating company. That being said, I want to turn to the physical attacks on substations. The Moore County, North Carolina with Duke Energy obviously comes immediately to mind, where one or more individuals used a high-power rifle. They knew what they were shooting at. They clearly shot at cooling fins and fans on transformers. So it was a sophisticated attack, not a matter of pot shots. I'm not sure, though, how in an infrastructure that is exposed everywhere for thousands of miles of lines, millions of components, how we can protect every recloser or every voltage support condenser bank or whatever. But I know one of the things that Evergy has done, certainly in my district, is that you've started putting concrete walls around substations, which would be of help, I think, in keeping high-powered rifles from shooting at transformers. And I really want to compliment you all on that, even though it's a capital expenditure. How far along is that project? What is being done to, if you will, up armor the physical aspects of Evergy's network, understanding that you can't protect every transformer on every pole?
Yeah, there's 963 substations in Evergy territory. 50 of them have what I would say is really good physical security. Like I said earlier, we're reassessing, our approach to physical security at a substation level, not just really substation, but plants and, any of our physical assets. Putting concrete barriers up at every substation is not really a good option. It's not one that could be executed in a even reasonable amount of time, multi-years. But there are other things you can do to help protect against a high-powered rifle from 150 yards away, right? You can disrupt sight lines. I mean, you can do that with screening and simple things. So we're looking at those certainly in the short term. However, right, the critical substations, if we deem, hey, we really should have concrete barriers and things like duplicate transformers, putting old transformers as out there as decoys. We're looking at things like that, trying to be as creative as possible, because you're right. I think the sniper or sniper capable rifleman from 150 yards, it's hard to really stop that person. You have to make it hard for them to see their target. So that's what we're focused on, and then having the right forensics capabilities in place. And ultimately, we really need the punishment to far outstrip the crime to help deter folks from wanting to do that. Now, you're terrorists, you're not going to stop them. They're going to do it anyway. But maybe the guys that were trying to rob a local business would think twice about that. Maybe not the guy who blew up his car at the solar array, but there's some amount of folks that are doing these things, whether it's vandalism, trying to steal copper. Those things really need to have stiff punishments tied to them. I think it's securing the substation and the electrical infrastructure is certainly, one of my primary jobs, but I think it's going to take all of us, right? Communities watching what's happening and see something, say something, getting law enforcement involved at a local level. It's going to take all of that to improve the, security of the grid.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me the questions. I would observe, however, please come to the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee sometime, because we talk extensively about the fact that increasing penalties typically is not a deterrent to these types of crimes, and relying upon the legislature to increase penalties does not solve the physical or cybersecurity problems or vulnerabilities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you for the comments. Representative Penn for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the points that you just made, Mr. Gary. My question goes back to something that you were referring to earlier, how the feds came down and notified you of what was happening from their purview after the fact, and then came in and conducted investigation or pen testing or your intrusion detection or prevention pieces. And that's really good that you have prevention as well. A lot of people just do detection. My question is that the custom of the federal government to come in and be a lagging indicator to you, or do they keep you notified of impending types of situations and threats, or how aware are you? Is it just the fusion cell? What does that landscape look like?
Yeah, in that scenario, it was part of their investigation, right, from a law enforcement perspective. That's when they get involved, when there's a law broken that they need to investigate. Now we meet with the FBI a couple times a year. We talk informally a couple more times a year, and it's really about what are they seeing relative to our industry and Evergy specifically, so that those conversations happen frequently. They meet with the CEO and give him an update on an annual basis. So those conversations are happening. They reach out when they see, like in that case, right, when they see something happening, something leaving the network that shouldn't be, trying to talk to, a known bad IP address. In this case, those IP addresses had already been taken down. So, he was trying to talk to something that wasn't there anymore. That's how they get involved.
Roger. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern is for national security, the part of the national security apparatus and blanket that Evergy provides here in Kansas and in their activities, and just wanted to understand a little better if we need to engage our federal partners, that they push information, let them know a list of bad actors that are out there, the targets that they're actually trying to acquire, so that they're better equipped to stay vigilant. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Vice Chairman Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today. So I remember back around 2010, there were concerns at a national level about the vulnerabilities of the system, and they started a program to harden those called CIP, or Critical Infrastructure Protection. I didn't hear you mention that in your testimony, and I know in that program they came in and audited, and probably gave you 300 points to follow up on. Is that program completed? Is it still underway? I just wondered why that wasn't mentioned.
And NERC-CIP is an ongoing governance program, right? So we have to do things on an annual basis, and it's probably because it's nature now. It's part of our daily behavior. There are compliance requirements that are daily, monthly, weekly, yearly. We have to do a cyber vulnerability assessment on an annual basis on NERC specific assets. So we do that every year. We have to be audited. I think it's at least every third year. We just went through one 2 years ago, so I think we're due in 24. We had one finding having to do with access management, which is an area that a lot of folks struggle with, and we're no different from that perspective. We interact with MRO, which is the authority, the regional authority that manages compliance to NERC CIP for kind of the Midwest region. And we work with them on a daily basis. There may be, we missed a patching window or something, and we work with them to report that and mitigate that. So that's happening all the time. So I apologize. I did mention it talking about substation security using the guidelines from NERC CIP, but I didn't talk about it from a cyber perspective. So apologize for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, I think this will be the last question from our ranking member, Mr.
Thank
Olson.
you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. You actually talked about in regards to your systems that sometimes you guys actually do simulation attacks, kind of. And if you do find a problem, you have 30 days to, fix it. Is that my understanding? Do you actually document that? And when you talk to law enforcement, do you tell them this is what we guys found in terms of your simulation attacks on particular?
Yeah, I mean, the only time that we had, law enforcement give us action items was the Wolf Creek, the Nuclear 17 event. So I want to make sure everybody doesn't think we've got the FBI crawling around our network all the time. It was that one event, right? And they were recommendations, right? It wasn't hey, you need to go do this. It was, hey, you probably should do these things, and we did because they were good recommendations, right? So we don't have that level of interaction going on a regular basis. But when we do bring in a third party to do assessments, right, that costs money to do that, right? It's an investment of our time and real dollars. We do put together action plans and document those plans, to address whether it's vulnerabilities. We try to get those patched, right, within 30 days of a patch being available. That's also a NERC CIP requirement. It's actually 35 days, but that's kind of a weird requirement. So we do it on a monthly basis.
Mike, with respect to the documentation, do you actually share that information, say for instance, with other co-ops per se? Do you share that just in case there is an attack for an attack on other substations, not necessarily Evergy, but do you actually share that information as to, hey, this is what we did, or is that
organization?
Do you guys keep that internal?
Now there's an organization. It's called the Electric ISAC, which is it's a nationwide organization that utilities are members of or can be members of and report information, whether it's physical security, cyber security, it could be anything, a phishing attack, a new vulnerability that was found, report to the ISAC, and they share that with all utilities. So that happens. I probably get 10 notifications a day from the EISAC.
Well, so in other words, the only way that information is shared among utility companies here in Kansas is through the national. You don't necessarily talk to, like say for instance, you do simulation attacks on your system. You found something, maybe somewhere, the municipality has a similar system that you may not share with them. I mean, is that my understanding, or everybody has to be getting information from the national?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a Kansas ISAC or a Missouri Kansas community of utilities. I'd be happy to be involved in that.
Well, it just goes back to what Representative Penn was talking about in terms of national security, in terms of if everyone's talking basically, if everybody's on the same page, at least we're actually protecting ourselves with respect to vulnerabilities. That's the reason why I was asking that question.
Yeah, sure. I'm I'm not going to share specifics about vulnerabilities and say that they're Evergy, because
Simulation attacks, basically, not necessarily averaging in terms of if you simulate an attack.
no, I'm not going to. You think about it, right? If we start saying, hey, we had this vulnerability in this Oracle database as an example, and now I've shared that publicly in whatever format or fashion. Now, bad guys may have access to that information, right? I'm trusting that whoever I'm sharing that with can protect that information. And I'm not a trusting person when it comes to cybersecurity. So sharing that specific vulnerability information or how we protect and specific tools that we use, I'm not going to do that. I'm happy to do that in an informal situation. I'll run around every co-op in the state and meet with them and talk about cyber if that's something that can happen. But sharing specifics, about our environment, that doesn't make any sense, right? It's going to potentially cause attacks, right? Giving the bad guys the ability to attack us and something to shoot specifically for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Gary, thanks for being here. It's interesting to hear.
Thank you.
Committee next week, we will be meeting on, we're going to be meeting on this coming Thursday, February 2nd. We'll have Next Era Energy Transmission in here on transmission opportunities in Kansas. Also going to be hearing from the Kansas Corporation Commission on competitive electric rates throughout the state. So looking forward to hearing that. And then next week, we will be starting to hear bills. So they're coming right up. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.